So let's build a crazy idea how to try to engage students, how to engage junior developers, and how to organize something which we have been doing on kind of very small scale for the organization that I work for, Accenture, to organize it on a much wider scale and opening it up to basically anyone, not just kind of people we get in our boot camps. So yeah, today I'll give you a kind of short introduction about the program itself. I'll explain what materials are available, where you can get more information you can read up, where the training materials will be accessible, and I'll explain about the business use case that we'll try to build and the scope for development that we'll do. And afterwards, Karim will explain about using Azure DevOps and Git. So kind of give you the introduction that you need so that once you start writing code, you actually can kind of properly store it and version it and kind of, it's not just on some 10 folders somewhere on your PC. Yeah. So, well, let me just check the chat functionality. Can somebody raise the hand? Is somebody brave enough? It should be accessible somewhere on the top on the Teams client. And it should give, yay, I see raised hands. Excellent. Good, good. So there are people and not bots in the meeting. That's always good to see. Then please raise your hand if you are currently studying. So I want to see who the students are. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. Okay. And let's continue. One more question. Maybe somebody is brave enough to unmute themselves. Can we do questions?
You mean we ask you?
Oh, yes, that works. Excellent. So at least somebody was brave enough. So yeah, while this is a presentation and kind of the meeting sessions that we'll have will consist of two parts. And the first one will be always kind of presentation. Depending on the speaker, you might get kind of more show presentation, or you might get something more interactive where we'll ask you some questions or ask your opinions or kind of try to get your participation. With the current number of people, I think it's still very manageable to do interactive and can have time for question. And I see a raised hand. Yes, please. Okay, no question there. Okay. So that we are familiar with the controls, let's proceed. So let's build. What is the event where you have appeared? So it's a training course which focuses on self-study. So we don't have books to read. We haven't published anything. We have reading materials as trainings, but we will rely on kind of you taking your own time to do study work, trying out the things that you learn, and trying to build things. So the focus is on self-learning, and the focus is on building working software. So unlike in tutorials you might find online, we try to kind of have working software in the sense that every little piece and component that we take, we can connect them together and we are able to run it as one solution. So the end result would be something that you would be ready to publish on your own on the web and have people access that and use that. Of course, it will be simplified. Of course, we probably will not have enough time to build everything ourselves. And the goal is not to create a new competing product for the market, but the goal is to have something that works together and gives you a taste how we kind of do our work when we work in projects, at least, well, from my experience. and give you kind of this sense that you are building something complete and something working instead of just bits and pieces there and there. Yeah, so the contact sessions will be happening roughly once a week. We'll get to the schedule. And during the contact sessions, from one side, it will be kind of show and tell presentations or live coding. And from the other side, it will be a Q&A for any questions that you might have or any support that you can ask for. And that's kind of reserved time during kind of our call time. During the rest of the time, we'll get to the channels, but you'll have access to Discord, where I will encourage everyone to sign up, because that's kind of our support mechanism in between the meeting sessions. So you can go there, ask questions either to the study group or then to the wider developer community that we have available. But the caveat is that there is no guarantee that somebody kind of will be in time there and answer your question. So you might need to wait a bit longer. Rather, wherein as in these Q&A sessions, we'll try to kind of have enough people available to respond to your questions based on how much questions we get in the end. And for you, the participation is either on your own. You can do everything, kind of go through this program on your own separately. You can kind of group together with a development buddy, so somebody with whom you like to do these exercises together. And individually, of course, you'll be learning more, but with somebody else, you might be experiencing some of the challenges which you don't really get to when you're doing development all alone. Yeah. So for the structure. So today is introduction, and we are not going to write code today. We'll be working with code repositories. Well, somebody might be quick enough to start writing code, but we'll go through the business problem. But today we'll also kind of define what is the training material you need to go through, and what is the development that you need to start doing on your own for the next session. So this is kind of the first point. Before next session, you'll need to find your own time and kind of reserve your own time to go through the training materials and try to build the next increment. You can do it alone, you can do it in pairs, whatever is preferable for you. Well, we have no way to follow up on that, but in pairs it might be easier for you if you're less experienced, and individually it might be more beneficial because you kind of get to do everything by yourself. And every session that we'll have, roughly half of that, so 1.5 hours, will be spent in either show and tell or live coding. So we'll try to show how we would write, the presenters will show how they would write the specific increment. And after that, there will be the Q&A time where we'll try to support you with the questions you might have. And next session is usually announced within this first 1.5 hours and explained what you need to try to learn and to build before we get to the kind of contact time when we kind of build it all together. For live coding, the code will be shared in the repository. So in case you missed a session or kind of didn't manage to complete on your own, that shouldn't kind of be a source of worries, because you will have access to that source code and you can start from any point in time. So if you missed this 1 week, that's not a problem. You could just watch the video later or just take from the end solution that we provided and start from there going forward. Of course, if some of you started to tailor the complexity a little bit, then you're a bit on your own if you deviate from the standard program. So the overall schedule. So today, as I mentioned, it's introduction time. We'll look at the use case, the tooling, and the basics how to work with source control. After that, on April 29th, same time as today, so 4 o'clock, we'll have a first session with specific development already. So ASP.NET Core, MEC frontend, so the very basics of web development. And we'll talk later what you'll have available for training materials and what specifically you should be trying to build for the first iteration. Next sessions then progressively will add more complexity for the application. So once we have the front end working, next is adding data and database. After that, we'll look how to do testing. Well, dependency injection doesn't say anything to you right now, but it will after May 13. I really hope that. And we'll also talk about code quality and kind of best practices which to follow when doing code. After that, deployment and hosting on Azure. So at this point, your application would run not only on your own PC, but you would be able to deploy it on the cloud to have it available for anyone who might want to try it. And you yourself can get familiar with how deployment happens and, well, what actually Azure is. Once we have that in place, Azure Functions has their own separate topic. So this is a different way how to write applications compared to what we do in the very beginning. And the first kind of 3 sessions, I would call them custom development, because, well, that's using the basic tools to do whatever you want. With Azure Functions, you can have your own environment in which you can execute specific code. And we'll get deeper into what it means, but that's kind of a specific area for development that you can explore. For cognitive services and Azure integration services, so here you will look how to call different external services from your application, and also how to make different applications work together, what the integrations mean. A lot of the kind of code which we do for our clients involves some kind of integrations, because in the end, it's not only our software, but it's probably the whole ecosystem of different services and software that works together. So that's quite important topic which we want to cover. And in June 17th, we'll have the closing event. At that point, all of you should have at some level completed the whole application. And for the ones of you who are brave, we will have the final demos. So at that point, we will not be the ones who share the screens and show what it is, but I'll be encouraging every one of you to kind of take a moment and show what you've built, tell us about your experience, and maybe kind of show a few screens, or at least to provide the URL so people can open it and look what it is. So yeah, that's the schedule. I'll pause a little bit now my presentation so that you can ask questions. Rob, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So like I'm looking at the whole schedule, and I see Azure functions, but like, are there going to be other like things related with Azure? So like most particularly event grids, are we going to cover something like that as well, or that's on my own?
Event grids probably will not fit into the current schedule, but okay. For kind of, if anything else is interesting here for you, then we can always tailor what specifically is being built. And I, on some level, I can provide you some support with the tasks or with the ideas, what can be added from that specific area so you can explore it on your own. And if you can need some support with the training materials, maybe we can find something, but as it's not part of kind of, well, this agenda, then probably it will be a little bit more limited in this case. Okay. But let's see.
Okay, cool. Just one more thing. From your experience, is it possible to use event grids on table changes? Like, yes, just a yes or no question.
Event grid on table changes.
Yeah, because like I've been trying to figure out all the day, but
I will say I don't know answer.
Okay.
In this case.
That's good enough. That's good enough because like that's a top one. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks.
Yeah, but please follow me up with this question on Discord. I might do some thinking and I could help you with that.
Okay. Can you like put the link in the chat?
We
for
will
Discord?
get to the Discord and the communication channels in a moment. But anyone
Okay.
else have any questions about the content and the schedule?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So the way how we kind of graded the difficulty is that most of the presentations will and kind of materials will assume that you probably haven't really done a lot of in-depth work in these areas. So we kind of try to cover the basics and ensure that people have a good grasp of the basics. But at any point, if you feel that the task at hand is not difficult for you enough for you or doesn't provide a learning challenge, I will encourage you to kind of contact me and to check for what else can I do. And usually we can come up with a specific business problem or add a specific framework within the application so that you have a chance to kind of do something a bit different from the rest of the group, but still something that's kind of cohesive, and hopefully we can try to provide support also for what you're building, because if it's not me, I can probably try to find some colleague or somebody from the community who can step in and help with that. But of course, always when we kind of sidestep from the kind of prepared path, it will be something a bit different and it will be a bit rockier. Okay. So the links. We have our own kind of GitHub repository where we store the materials for the program. And keep in mind, the program itself is very fresh enough that I was updating this presentation still today. And for the kind of later sessions, we don't have all the materials in place yet. So those will be appearing as we go along with the training program. But the location will be always the same. And once I'm done with the presentation, I'll copy the link. If I try to copy it now, it will be just a disaster. So I'll copy the link in the chat so you can open and bookmark it so you have it available. In addition, Discord is kind of the main communication channel outside of these calls. The calls themselves we currently are doing in Microsoft Teams just because it's easier for us to do recordings on those calls. But in between the calls, we started to use Discord because for us it's something else from the work communication environment, where we have also the rest of the community attending. So there is more chance that people might be able to help to specific questions that you have. So there will be kind of this community part, and you'll have your own private nook where you can talk amongst yourselves and kind of ask questions, share experiences, or just chat. So the business use case. As an event organizer, I want to see contact information for people who have applied to the event. Very relevant topic. An issue which I currently struggle with because for me it means different websites, Excel with a list of people, and trying to manage all that to understand then whom I need to message, who attended event, who didn't attend event. So that is the business problem at core, which our application will try to solve. It's common enough. We build a lot of different registries in software. Most of our clients need some sort of list of something. In this case, it will be a list of people and their contact info. But it might be maintenance works done on a specific sea vessel. It might be something like, well, people registries on a national level. It might be people registries for loyalty cards. Lists are a bread and butter in a way when you do business application development. So this is what we chose as the business use case in our situation. And here, the basic situation is the application that we're building at its core will be replaceable for managing just one list of people. And that is the minimum that we can offer as a challenge. Everything else on top is based on your own initiative and how quickly or how well you will be able to progress. For somebody who's experienced or kind of who is already working with these technologies, it might be that it's something you could kind of cook up in between 2 sessions and be done with it. That's totally fine. After all, as I defined, it's already somebody who uses these things. But to kind of give you time and space to learn at your own pace, we kind of have spread this out over kind of these different sessions, and each of the increments will try to add something to the application itself, and also something additional to the business use case. So the reasoning why we are building something and why we're adding something. And if you're building your own application, I would say that if this business use case doesn't quite fit you, you are free to kind of replace event organizer with pizza shop or music store. Well, Microsoft's favorite reference application to use. But you can switch things up or build your own application if it's similar enough to what we are doing. But this is the use case that we chose, and that's what we'll kind of show our code to be aligned with. So the untechnical schema. In the end, we'll have a web application. So in the core of it is this ASP.NET MVC box, which will represent in the end a server running on Azure. Well, basically Azure will be running this application. And this application will interact with database because we need a place to store our data. In our case, it will be Microsoft SQL. It could be anything else from the storage solutions that Azure offers. It could be Oracle database. It could be MySQL. So, and other services, so these will be either functions or cognitive services or any other kind of software as a service offers or kind of software that somebody else wrote and made available for us that can be called from our code. And kind of this represents the different integrations that we are able to do for the applications. Client browser. So the web page itself will be shown on the client browser and the interaction with the web page will happen through the client browser. And we will have also for front-end development also a Blazor implementation. So that's one of kind of the new approaches how to do can do this client-side browser implementations. But if you want to use or want to experiment with Vue.js or React, those are acceptable replacements and are also good choices kind of to pick from. I see a question in the list. So Frank. Okay, the question is gone. Yeah, I'm sorry if I sometimes don't immediately notice your raised hand. I'll try to better myself. So yeah, this is the kind of rough drawing of the technical, well, not technical schema. Any questions you have about the business use case or the kind of planned technologies that are used?
Can we use blobs tables as well instead of SQL?
Yes. Yes, the sample is using NT framework, but if you are building it also on kind of, well, in this case, well, tables could work easily. Yeah, definitely. So feel free to deviate. And in the end, if you want some comments on the solution or just to explore it, it's a possibility that you kind of switch and move away from that. The only kind of downside in this case, once again, we probably will not have kind of extensive materials specifically for this implementation. But at least from Q&A perspective, we can kind of try to support you. And in this regard, if you plan to deviate, let's try to kind of write it down on Discord, so at least I get a picture of, I will call it non-standard needs, so that we understand what kind of expertise we need to attract to help with the Q&A so that we are able to support you better. Okay. Anything else?
Not from me, no.
Okay. So in this way that we are planning to work with the incremental sessions, it's unavoidable that we'll have kind of this rework. So we will write something in one session, and then in the next session we'll have to rewrite it because, well, now we learned something extra. One example which, well, somebody maybe already anticipates is when we'll introduce testing, because at that point we'll start to explore what additional needs are there to kind of ensure good unit testing coverage. Okay, I just looked at the chat and, oh, you've been writing questions in the chat and not saying to me. Oh, come on, that's mean. Do say something if you write a question. GDPR will need to take into account. If you're not using it for public and not providing the application for public use, or asking people to enter private information into your website, you're probably clear. But if you're interested regarding GDPR, it's a very interesting topic, and I'll be really happy to discuss questions in Discord, because that's actually for the project that I'm working in currently. It's always a very reoccurring topic. The larger the project, or kind of the larger the client that you're working on, the larger the concerns regarding GDPR, because, well, as of the changes to legislation in Europe, basically they removed the ceiling for how much damages they can sue the company for if there is a breach. So the larger the company, the bigger the concern. Okay, so ASP.NET, what does it do? Yeah, to clarify on that, so that will be entirely next session. So I will not delve too much into it here, and you'll have reading material available specifically for the next session. So ASP.NET kind of responds to the browser requests. So it's a framework which standardizes the way how you can write websites. It's one of the ways how they can be done. But currently for Microsoft, that's, I would say, one of the kind of most popular ones if you want to kind of deal with web requests. Yeah, but more in detail we'll go into when we get into the next session. Okay, back to the presentation. So first one I answered, yeah. So in terms of focusing, what to do. As the sessions progress and we kind of get new additions to the application, and especially when you get your own ideas and kind of start to get a feel for what you could build in addition to the minimum requirement, the recommendation is to focus first on the mandatory features. So focus first on achieving the business objective. And this works for everywhere where you work, be it a hackathon or be it doing some business development. Try to get the requirements out of the place, and then you can add always more complex things or more interesting things. Don't get stuck trying to build everything perfectly, or kind of, if you have planned that, well, I will want to use something different here, skipping the basic implementation. For me, myself, when I start doing new projects, it's usually a tricky stage, because at that point, well, there is this new framework and I would also want to use this new framework. So how do you kind of put everything together if everything is new? So hence the reasoning, let's start with something basic, let's make it working. And after that, it can maybe be made pretty, it can be made more difficult, it can be expanded to do more things. But the beginning is always checking that you can put these Lego pieces together and they connect and work. Yeah, so next point are already covered, I think. So if you want specific tasks We can probably provide you ones that are in Canon with the business use case, and we can try to support you as long as you kind of timely inform us that, well, this is the technology area that I will proceed. I will do this and this and this. So we can try to look if we can support you then towards this direction. But of course, it will be a bit less than the materials that we show and have ready. And the last part is about maintainability. For a training exercise, the way how we build it, build the application, the way how we deal with unit tests and add testing and code quality to the mix, it's an overkill if you're just experimenting. We get that. It's an overkill for the application that we're building, given that it's, well, even if I created my own event management software, it will probably would have me and maybe some kind of co-hosts using that, so 5 users, and it would be overkill to write custom software for that. But we need to learn, so hence we're doing it, and we want to learn the good practices. So we'll try to do things in as good way as possible and try to kind of build these habits, how to structure code, what kind of things like unit testing, dependency injection, which requires a separate session. You might not do those if you just are in a hurry to build something and get something out of the door. And we sometimes see that in smaller companies, well, that becomes the kind of de facto standard of operations. Let's just deliver something quickly. But it's usually a very short-lived approach under which people themselves start to suffer. So hence we want to focus more on the kind of quality of the code that we in the end create and kind of build a craft. If you later decide to participate in the hackathon, which will be happening during this summer, then for that, I will probably suggest throw out some of the kind of good practices out of the window. Maybe don't try to write unit tests for everything. It's a different environment and it's a different mode of operation. We also kind of hear that startups operate very differently from big companies, and it's also one of the reasons when you need to kind of do something quickly and get results, or you trying to do things in the correct way. So during the training sessions, we'll try to do things maybe less, but in a good way. Okay. Next slide. So next topic. So in 2 weeks, we'll have our next session. And I'll be the presenter for that session. So I'll be doing the live coding there. Well, I'll try to do my live coding. So the topic is ASP.NET Core. How do we build MVC application, and how we deal with front-end development. I will not go very much into kind of this very client-side part. So how to write HTML, how to write CSS. So we'll touch on that, but we'll definitely not go in depth for that. And main focus will be on this ASP.NET specifically. So what then is what you need to do? So in these 2 weeks, you need to create a web page that can show a static list of people. It doesn't need to be pretty. That's an optional requirement, let's say. But it needs to be able to kind of open up in browser. It will be run from your Visual Studio. We'll get to the tools in a moment. But you'll need to be kind of open it up in Visual Studio, launch it, and able to access it from the browser. Yeah, and show a list or a table or something that can resembles a list that has people's names and some maybe contact information. How much of information, it's up to you, but we will not be storing it in database yet. So it's really just a static list. You have to do decisions how you want your navigation and layout to look. So here I will give absolutely no recommendations at this point. So look and feel of the application is totally in your hands. I will give a recommendation. Try to take a blank piece of paper and sketch it out, what you want to build. It's a good way how to kind of start to define things without getting too technical with it. But once you have done that, then the idea is that you have the basic layout in place that will stick with you for the rest of the exercise. The specific kind of visual design and kind of how beautiful it looks like, it's something you can work on incrementally during the sessions. If you want to do kind of the final demo. And yeah, and you can beautify it at the point in time when you feel that you have time to spend on that. So that's not the primary reasoning, and you will not be kind of judged by anyone if it's purely functional web page. On the other hand, if there is somebody artistic with kind of in the group, or somebody wants to go to the visual overkill, by all means, but please do show it in demo. I do love fancy websites, especially if people create something interesting or unusual. Well, sometimes unusual can be not so functional, but as long as the idea is original, I'm all happy to kind of see it in the final demo. Yeah, and the last requirement, which I will not be able to verify, but which I would say that is a must. So you have to store your code in source repository. We'll get to Git in a moment, but you shouldn't have it only laying around on your laptop, desktop, external flash drive. Don't be the person who loses a couple of days of progress because you haven't used source control. And if you haven't yet worked on your kind of bachelor's degree work or something like that, you'll probably agree with me. Well, once you get there, you'll probably notice some of your colleagues who might have report things like, well, I was almost ready and then my flash drive crashed or my laptop burned and I lost everything and had to rewrite everything in 1 week. I actually had one of my classmates report that he had an external drive where he stored his bachelor's. Okay, my laptop, that's an excellent comment. Yeah, but I had a classmate who had external disk. Well, it's very safe to use external disk to store things. But if it's the only place which is used to store things, then once that disk kind of goes feet up, everything in it goes as well. In his case, luckily, we are able to kind of use some of the free software to recover info from that disk. But yeah, he was not a happy man at that point when he was calling and asking what to do. And while this is only some training course you're attending somewhere here over the internet, you don't want to lose any progress that you do. So source control, very good idea. Okay, questions about next, kind of what will need to happen after we finish today's call and until we meet next time in 2 weeks. Yes, please.
So we're basically creating one HTML file and one CSS file.
A little bit more. So it, yeah, so it needs to be a web application, not web page. I'll have to correct my presentation. So I want you to use ASP.NET MVC to run the web page and to serve the web page to the client. HTML and CSS would work, but then there's more work to do for the next session because we have no way to do kind of meaningfully change the layout for all the pages that we have together. So it's very, very limiting for us then.
So we use, sorry, maybe wrong, built-in views?
We can, well, you can use built-in views when you're generating the MVC application. But in that case, if you're using built-in views, I would say you need additional complexity for the task, and I would go for the UI overkill. one suggestion, if you are familiar already with the built-in views for MVC, I would explore mostly client-side development. So instead of kind of creating the page that works mostly on the server side, like the MVC does, go with the Blazor part of the tutorial, and we have links for the Blazor tutorials, so go with that and try to make it mostly from client side, so that it's running mostly on the client.
Could I ask a question?
Yep.
Are ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core the same thing?
If you would ask somebody in academia, they would say totally no. You see, the names are different, so how can it be the same thing? If you ask me, they overlap sufficiently to say that it's an easy enough switch, and in most cases you don't really notice the difference. So if you have worked with ASP.NET, and then you'll be quite easy for you to jump into ASP.NET Core. So it's a newer version.
Okay, thanks.
And I think if I'm not mixing things up currently, that the Microsoft's intent was for the next version to drop the core in the end that is there, but just name it as, was it ASP.NET 6 or something like that. So. Okay. Anything else? So for the tasks themselves, I will reiterate them in Discord, and you can ask a clarifying question regarding how much there is to do, or is this enough, or can I do something more? So I treat it as an ongoing conversation between us, and we'll try to clarify it as the questions arise, because it's kind of broad, that kind of task is broad enough so that you can do a lot of things. As small as you want, or you can, as large as you can invest time into that. So, because if we return, just a second, if we return to the business use case, so event organizer who wants the ability to manage people who apply to the event, then you don't only need one page. You don't only need a list of people. You probably need some form to sign up to the event. You might need a way how to create different kinds of events. You might need to do specific authorization for people who have applied to the event, so they have access to different information. And these kind of are still pages that can be created, and additional content or complexity that can be added on top of this kind of basic business use case. But as it's also the first session that we have, the minimal goal is quite minimal. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Before we proceed further, let me just show on the screen some of the things that we have available. Do you see my browser window?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So, and I'll actually do the smart thing and copy the link into the chat. There you are. That's us in GitHub. And the repository in question is Let's Build 2021. If we do another one of those this year, then I'm in trouble because I need a new name for it, but that's my problem. And this is the outline. So here we still have kind of 8 different sessions. So every folder corresponds to one session. We have kind of overall instruction information, what it contains, as we have labs ready, kind of written already for the first sessions. Those are mapped to the different topics that we do. And here you also have the prerequisites for the software that you need. Note to self, I probably need to add links here. Yeah, and while for introduction, you have the presentations that we'll be showing today. For every other session, what you'll actually need to do when you go and kind of go through the learning part is read the descriptions and the pre-read materials. And here you have a list of links. So what we are doing is we are collecting materials that are openly available. So a lot of times it's Microsoft documentation, which already has very good tutorials, so it's easier for us to use them rather to maintain our own training. But it's also then different links to other blog posts or other articles which we thought were valuable to read and to go through. Yeah, and this is kind of the reading material we would suggest you to go through and try when you kind of go and try to build that application. In sources, we'll have reference implementation available. And this is kind of staged based on kind of incrementally going through the application and adding different parts. The mapping for that was described in the very beginning of the repository. And topic highlight folder will have description of kind of aspects which you can explore when you go deeper, kind of defining the overall scope of the implementation that we had in mind. But of course, as I mentioned, we are only kind of showcasing one small part, and you might kind of want to go broader and do some things quite differently. So for example, instead of Blazor, you might want to use something else like Vue.js or something like that. And in that case, of course, you're free to do that. Good. Questions about the repository?
I've never used Git.
We'll get to that in a moment.
No, you asked about the repository, so I'm asking.
Yeah.
Now, like, do we have our own folders somewhere here, or do we put them in our own account?
You will use your own account for your own code. This specific repository is where you can find the samples that we have, and you can kind of just read the materials going through GitHub itself. But for development, you will kind of create your own account on GitHub. That's free for everyone to use, to create, and you can use that for your own code and to kind of store it there. Did it answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Couldn't press the mute button.
Okay. Then other thing I want to, yeah,
one
sure.
more question for me. This presentation, will we be able to access it somewhere?
Yes, as I mentioned, it's already in the introductions folder.
Okay.
Right here, introduction to program. As you see, it's all work in progress, and we are building part of it as we go. Don't be too scared about it. We are just slightly worried about it, but it all will work out. Okay. Yeah, and what I also wanted to show was Discord. And I see a lot of you have already joined. Thank you. So yeah, a bit about Discord. So the text channels here, so these are available for everyone who has joined community. And these are also people from the meetups that we've done so far that joined. And you can use kind of any of these channels just to chat or ask people questions. That's fine. If you want to have more, well, private conversations or just amongst Let's Build participants, we have this Let's Build area set up. Currently, nobody of you have access there yet. I'll try to arrange access for it later, and it will be basically whoever raises hand to my question will be added to this Let's Build area. I'll organize it later today after we kind of are done with the meetup today. But there you will have your own areas where you can kind of also chat amongst yourselves, ask questions. So I know it can be a bit intimidating to walk into a new room and publicly start asking questions. So hence we added a more privacy. So only people who are participating as facilitators or as contributors to Let's Build will be given access here. And also you'll have kind of voice channels if you want to organize talk amongst yourselves and kind of work in small pairs or groups. What I strongly suggest is that you try to ask these questions. You are not afraid to ask them. And when you see questions where you know answers to, try to answer them. Because for me, kind of growing up, going through these things, having people ask questions and helping them, it was the way how I learned more in depth. So I would want to encourage everyone to kind of participate there. So it's a shared collaborative effort of learning and studying. And if you have any other needs or feel that something is not quite working or are just confused about the whole situation or want to kind of say something privately about the training program, you can always reach out to me directly or via private messages here, and we can kind of chat about it or talk about it, or maybe I can do something to help you or at least point you to somebody who could help you. So yeah, that's the situation with the community. Any questions? And yeah, if somebody still didn't have the Discord link, I'll copy that as well.
Hi, I have a question. I see that this is getting recorded. Will the recording be available somewhere?
Yeah, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. I actually haven't prepared the link for that, so just give me a second and I'll do some self-advertisement.
And another question, let's say there's someone who really wants to take part of this, but is absolutely not available at this time. Is there a possibility to like watch these recordings, go through materials?
Yes,
ask some questions another time and stuff. Yep.
Yeah. So absolutely. You have to keep in mind that the more people kind of miss from the beginning, the harder it is for them to jump in and to participate. So maybe just joining for the last session would be less beneficial than joining from the very beginning. But we'll kind of, for every live coding session, we'll post the presentation, both the presentation and the video and the final source code, at least that we built, to the repository. So in that way, you can just pick up from there and continue from that source code. If you joined later, that doesn't matter. You just kind of start from, well, that point in time. Of course, it will be more limited and just kind of the basic implementation. So it will not be as fancy as for somebody who started from the beginning and added much more features to that.
I kind of meant more like for someone that is kind of not is it possible for someone to like go through these exercises on their own and maybe ask the questions they need answered like bit earlier or something that they are not available at evenings at all?
If I get your question right, that you're asking, so if they are not able to participate in the Q&A sessions that are reserved, we'll still try to support people's questions in Discord outside of the reserved Q&A time, so that we are not kind of limiting people only to these calls. And you can go to Discord and ask either publicly or kind of to the whole community or just to the student group. Yeah, and that way you will get some answers.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
I have a question. Is it a community service things? I mean, what is there for you?
What is there for me?
Yeah. For
Good question.
all of us.
Why do you want these existential questions? For me, it's well, one aspect would be giving back to the community and all that kind of very high and correct comment. But the thing is, ever since, well, in my career, I've been in some way teaching people. So when we started Microsoft, kind of this Baltic developer community, well, I joined because I thought it's important to have people and that we can kind of share our experiences, because otherwise it's just developers working in their own companies and not really seeing what's out there. Because, well, I started from a very small companies, and the first actually was a startup where it was me as developer and then 2 people guiding me and managing me. So that was my outlook to development when I started. So having a community, I think it's something valuable, and if it takes some work to get it going, why not? If that answers your question. Okay.
And maybe fast question. So we post our results in our GitHub account, but did someone check it, or we show it just on the last demo?
If you want somebody to go look at your code, it's a possibility. We will not be kind of doing formal follow-ups for everyone. We're not an academic institution which does exams in the end and tests everything. So it's kind of, you can take away what you can from the program, and that's it. So there will be kind of no validation of that. But if you want somebody to look at your code, share well, have the repository public at first so people can see it, and then share the link and ask people specifically what they need to look at. So code reviews are definitely a possibility. Of course, if you have gone with something custom, there will be less people who could help you. But yeah, I think it's very possible that we can do review of your code or kind of comment on your code if that's something that you think helps you. But for the final demos, then they would be hosted on Azure. And people, if you share the link, that people will be able to access it and check it out. So.
So about Azure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did we have some credential for it? Because as I see, we are learning about database. So did we use Azure SQL Server, or we use some virtual machine? Because I know the Azure provide the service app for free, but other stuff is not.
Yeah, for the databases, we'll have instructions specifically. So first of all, for students, you have your you can get access for a preset amount of credits using your student email, and we'll have instruction how you can sign up for that. So, and that kind of credit amount should be sufficient for the purposes of the training. We're not kind of trying to kind of hand it out or can encourage you to sign up immediately, because the first sessions can be done locally on your own laptops and hosted locally. But by the time when we get to, let me just switch. By the time when we get to May 27th, At that point, you're already deploying to Azure, so at that point, you will need to have Azure access. But it can be using that trial that Microsoft offers, so that's available for everyone. They give you kind of initial time trial, or it can be done then using these student credits. Or if you are really in trouble and have some difficulty with realizing those, then yeah, please contact me separately, but we'll be communicating this when we get closer to May. And the question that we had for the, does this training program end with some kind of document or certification? We don't have any kind of formal certificate in the end, but what we will have in the end is you are able then to try to apply for Azure certification, which is a separate process then that you need to go through. Yes, and I'm probably taking too much time answering questions, and we'll need to give the floor to Karim. But we'll have question time still after kind of we are done with the presentation. Don't worry. Yeah, but Karim, the floor is yours, and we need to learn about Git.
Hi everyone, my name is Karim Heredia, and I'm here to do like a basic training about Git. So I have some slides, I have some demo to share with you, but before we start, I want you to raise your hand if you have zero experience with Git. Can you? Raise your hand if you don't have any experience with Git. I just want to sense what is the amount of people who have actually worked with Git already. No one. Everyone knows something about Git? Yeah? Half hand raised. Okay, half hand. Okay, tell me then. If I ask you to create a repository, clone it, and start committing changes to your own repository, how many people would be able to do it already? No one. I think we having, okay, one person. Andres knows how to do it. Okay, Vitaly would be able to do it. I bet Yanis will be able to do it. Okay, so I'm not totally clear because I want to evaluate the level, but we're gonna go from the very basic. So if you have worked with Git, be prepared to see everything that you know already because I'm just going through the basic materials. I have another question for you. How many have already Visual Studio installed in their machines? Can you raise your hand, please?
Could you say it again?
Do you have Visual Studio already in your computer?
What exactly? Visual Studio.
Visual Studio, yes.
Oh.
One person?
I haven't installed it.
Two.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm not totally sure. By the way, I'm like to have interactive presentations, so please interrupt me. One other thing that you will find when I'm talking, I hope you see my screen, is that well, I'm not really that serious, right? So I prefer to have the interaction and the question answer. But what I will do is in the slides I have prepared, I have even done the screenshots and everything to demonstrate what it is. And then someone asked, I don't remember who asked about no experience with GitHub, with repositories. We're going to start from the very basics, as I mentioned, right? But to start, my name is Karim Heredia, as I mentioned, right? And the point of this time with all of you is that these slides and this demo that I will have is so you follow it step by step. Yanis mentioned previously, you eventually will have to keep your code somewhere, right? And you can either keep it in your pocket in a flash drive and then your dog will eat it, or you can keep it on GitHub, which is slightly more secure than having it in your flash drive, right? Your dog is not gonna eat GitHub, not yet anyway. But The idea is that you can follow these steps one by one. The other bit. Earlier today, I was talking with someone in one of my teams, and we were talking about what is the best way to use Git. And my answer was, well, there is no really best way, because if I ask software developers about the best way of doing things, we will start a war, right? That's how wars start. So then there are several ways of doing this. This is just one of them. The reason why I chose to do it this way is because Visual Studio 2019 becomes like a basic requirement for you, and you want to hear a funny detail. It's the first time that I have done it from Visual Studio, because I usually use Visual Studio Code, which is a different edition, and I typically do Git from the command line. I'm an old timer, so then I actually prefer to do that, but I started from the basics using Visual Studio. Just one quick intro. What am I doing here, right? So the first thing is I'm working for Microsoft. I'm an engineering manager in Microsoft, and we are actually working on essentially something you have used already extensively yourselves, which is this call. I work for Teams, not literally Teams itself, because we work on the communications behind Teams. So this is where I'm working. I'm originally from Guatemala. I have lived in several other countries that you can see there, but right now I'm located in Estonia, and I've been living here for 12 years. I studied computer science, so I'm a developer from, that's my background. I studied a couple of masters too, but the reason why I like to share all of this is because, well, I was once also starting to learn, right? Of course, there wasn't Git at the time. There was some older system that was not as good as Git, but I had to start from somewhere, right? So during my life, I have worked as a software developer. I have been a consultant about HR, IT, accounting, you call it, in several areas. I was a university lecturer. I even directed a computer engineering department for about 2.5 years. Worked as a text formatter in a newspaper, and I have been a manager too. So, well, I have these 3 hobbies there, but music is not really a hobby, it's more like an obsession. So I usually pepper my conversations with that. But that's about me, and that's the boring stuff out of the way. By the way, all of this means that I'm old, actually, right? So that's the bottom line of why I have so much written there. So what is our training today? At the end of this time, we will take around 45 minutes, I think, if we go like at the pace I'm thinking about. This is what you should know by the end. You will know why you need to use Git, how to create a repository, how to clone a repository, how to add a solution in Visual Studio to your repo, basic operations to commit your changes. You will see what is a commit, to understand how branches work, and maybe the flow between local and remote repositories. We will talk about what is a local, what is a remote. If we have time, and let's say that all of you, it turns out that you know all of these things already, well, we could, for example, try to use the command line Git, which is what I told you that I feel more comfortable using the command line than using Visual Studio, or try to do a pull request, or learn how to start changes, or whatever other question you have. By the way, I'm not a Git expert. I'm sharing what we do day by day, but I'm sure that one of you probably knows more Git than I do until now. Either way, I don't mind, because this is like finding the answers together, right? So the first, before I go into why do we need Git, if you can put in the chat, either you can put a GIF or you can put an emoji or whatever. How does the word Git make you feel? When you hear about this tool, about Git, how do you feel? What goes through your mind? You can put it in the chat right now, and I'll start. For example, for me, this is the face that I will put. Exactly, yeah, that's very, for me, it's crying because I don't remember.
Read the code word or smiley face?
Whatever you prefer. I just want to see what is the feeling among all of you about when you hear about Git. Of course, we have four people who have answered this. 5, Andre, is okay. Who else? We have more than 20 people in the call. I would expect to see at least a few more. Yeah, someone is happy about it. Good. So then we have different ideas. At least, Liva, this is exactly how I feel when I hear about Git, because I'm not an expert, right? Okay, cool. Italy Maxims. Okay. So now, why do you think that we need Git? So there is several reasons, but before we talk about why we need Git, let's talk about where Git comes from. So Git was developed in 2005. And this is a long story. It's actually a very interesting story. If you ever want to search for it in the internet, you will find out the real reason. The real reason is that Linux used to be developed in another source control system that was called BitKeeper. And BitKeeper at the time decided one day to charge their customers, not to Linux, but to all the customers, not to offer anymore the free license. And then Linus Torvalds, let's say that he wasn't happy about it, and then he and others in the Linux Foundation decided, okay, let's start our own source control system. They essentially wrote it in, I think, like a week or 2 weeks, the initial version. And this is the basics that it is still today. Of course, it's much better, much faster, and so on, but the basic idea came from that event. The idea, as you can see, is that there were very specific goals. It had to be super fast. It had to be simple, a very simple design. To support nonlinear development, which means that if you have, for example, 20 people working in a project, for sure you don't have only one straight line of code. There will be different mixes, people will be committing code and so on. It has to be fully distributed, because if you don't, you probably don't remember, but the older source control systems, they needed a server, which meant that if you had 20 people, you had to have 20 people with really good internet connection. Now it's distributed, so everyone has a copy and able to handle large projects. I have a small demonstration of a large project that I just copied into my machine a few minutes ago.
Can I have a question?
Of course you have, yes.
So I just opened the Visual Studio download page, and it says there are 3 versions: Community, yep, Professional, and Enterprise. Which one should I choose?
Community.
Okay,
definitely Community.
Excellent, because I even had the page ready for all of you to download. Go to the community, free download.
I read your mind.
Exactly, or I read yours actually, because I just opened it like 15 minutes ago when someone asked the question about VS Code. Either way, so we were talking about what the origins of Git, right? But Git is only one software in a larger family of languages, of tools, sorry. They are called version control or source control, source code management. There is lots of acronyms all over the world describing the same thing. It's a software that is meant to keep control of source code, to keep a history, to keep like an organization behind it, and that is able to share this code among several people. Now, Git specifically is a distributed version control system. So, for example, previously, before Git, the most popular source control system used to be CVS, and then later Subversion, and both of them, they are not distributed. They are client-server, right? And besides Git, it's not the only one. There is a few alternatives. Personally, I used to like very much this one called Mercurial. But Git is the one that is being used by most people. So you rarely find someone using Mercurial. There is some large organizations who switch to Mercurial, but Git is the winner, let's say. And by the way Mercurial started, just as an interesting bit, is that they started at the same time as Git for the same reason, because BitKeeper decided to start charging, and then someone else decided to start Mercurial. So they started literally the same month, and then they become like similar systems. But anyway, why do you need Git? Besides that the dog will eat your laptop if you don't do it, right? The first one is that you need to keep history about your code. I'm not sure how many of you have experience working, but you believe me, you will want to know one day what you were doing 6 months ago and who introduced a particular bug in your code. And you will need to go fix it. And all of this is, you need to see the history of the code. The second one is that you need to make changes as a team. By the way, we have about 20 people in this call, right? And just so you know, I'm a manager of 25 in Microsoft at the moment. I'm growing to about 32. My team is growing. So you can imagine in a group of people that large trying to share code is very complicated, right? So you need a good system for that. You also need to have multiple versions of the same code base, because at the moment that someone is fixing, for example, the CSS and HTML, the other one is fixing the backend, and a third one is fixing the database, and you have to work on the same code base. Well, you can do it at the same time. And the last one is that you can offer suggestions to other people on the code. For example, if you want to fix something about VS Code or whatever product is out there, you can actually go to the Git repository and propose a suggestion to them. This is how the open source world works today, and it's very efficient. So I'll stop there for a moment. What questions do you have? I'll wait for at least one question here. Anyone?
Yeah, it's like long before. If I have access to Visual Studio Enterprise, could I use it instead of Community?
Of course, of course. I think I was trying to figure out the differences, but I think the Git interface should be the same in the three editions there is. Because I work in Microsoft, I have the Enterprise edition, so whoever has the community should be able to tell me, okay, I don't see that in my Visual Studio, right? But I understand that Git is a basic block in the IDE, so it shouldn't be different. But we will see as we go along, because I have my Visual Studio open here.
Yeah, I think the enterprise differences are mostly for performance profiling and architecture solutions, so I don't expect any differences.
Great. Thank you for the question, Vitaly. I'll be stopping from time to time to ask for a question to see, as Yanni says, that there is no bots in the call, right? Although someone said that there was a bot. Anyway, how do we start a new repository? And this is where we have to go all together to GitHub. I have my GitHub window open here. So the first are all, who does not have a GitHub account so far? Can you raise your hand or say something or post something in the chat? I remember at least one person who did not have a GitHub account. Was it you, Liva, or someone else?
I said I never used it, but I actually have an account.
You do. Okay, so you do have. So everyone, go to GitHub and just log in. Just make sure that your account is there. You should see yourselves there. You don't have to remember how to use it, because that's what this session is for, Yanis. That's why I want you to at least log in right now, because we will start together, and then we will be able to create a repository, to commit code to the repository, and so on. Okay. By the way, this is my username, Sleeping Away. I'm with the same name in our Discord community too. It's just the user I use everywhere where I can get it, right? So you will find. Okay, so I assume that most of you has logged in to your GitHub account. So the first thing that we have to do is the concept of starting a new repository, and I'm going to offer you two alternatives. There is more than two, by the way. There is a lot more. The first one is that you can create a new repository, which is very easy. And by the way, this is free in GitHub. And I will create one with you together. I hope that my demo goes well, because everything that I'll be doing, I tested it yesterday, but I cannot reuse the repo because it already contains all the code that I added, right? But then the second way, which will work also, is that you can fork a repository. And I want to tell you the difference. A fork, for example, the link that Yanis shared earlier today about the presentation, the Baltic Developers Community, this one, right? So, for example, we have the Let's Build 2021, and you see that there is a merge pull request from me, right? So what happened? How did I get that repository? Well, instead of just going to create a new one, I clicked here in fork. So what a fork is going to do is going to create a copy of the repository for yourself that you can modify, you can check it out, you can do everything with it, but it doesn't modify the original one. So that's another way to experiment. If you have a favorite project, you can just fork it and then offer suggestions later. But for me, as you can see, I have several forks of places where I have just checked it out to see how it works, maybe do my own modifications, try to push them back. But GitHub is very good for it. But today, we're going to start with a blank repository. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a new repository here. And you should try to do the same. So I'm going to call it let's build 2021 Git demo. That's it. That name is available. I'm going to make it public. You can, of course, have it private if you prefer to. I'm just going to add a README file. It's a good practice to have a README file because it's where people will read when they come to your repo. For example, if we come to this repo, the README is what you see here below. This is what people will see. And there is a language called Markdown that you can use, but we won't get into those details. So we create the repository, I'll add a README. Don't add this git ignore because we're going to add it later. And the license, you can choose the license too. The idea of the license is if you're doing open source, what sort of license do you want to provide to people who are using your project? There are several types. I'm not going to get into this discussion right now because you can have a low degree just on talking about license. So won't get there. So I just add the README, I create the repository. And voila, you have a new repository. So I'll give you a minute. Can you raise your hand whenever you have your repository created, please? I'll wait for you. Or you can talk, or you can say something in the chat, either way, but I'm waiting for you. I do hope that you're hearing me. Oh, there you go. Andres has his repo.
Yes.
Okay. I'll wait for a few more. By the way, this repository will be perfect for your project. So the reason why I chose to create it this way is you can use it in the future for all the rest of the work that you're going to keep doing. Someone else? I don't want to start doing stuff only for Andres from now on. By the way, that's how you pronounce your name, right, Andres?
Yes, correct.
Okay, good. I need to start learning pronunciation too. Anyone else? That cannot be. Only one person is going to follow.
I think you're not seeing some hands because I see like 9 hands at least.
9 hands. Okay, excellent. Because yes, I see only 2, by the way. Very good. So then I'm seeing 9. Let's continue then. Okay. Thanks. By the way, that's what you told me. You see, this is a bug in Teams, which I probably need to report because I see only 2 here. And then you say you 9. So, okay. Let's continue then. Let's go back. We have a repository, right? So this is what we have there. So let's get started with 2019. Visual Studio 2019. By the way, for each section, you have a small Git keyword here. If you wanted to do it via command line, this is the command that you should be using, right? But we're not going to do it command line, which is Visual Studio, but just for reference for you for the future. So next step. When you install and you start Visual Studio, eventually, it doesn't mean that you have to do it at the beginning. Eventually, Visual Studio will ask you to authenticate with GitHub. So you can just click on the sign in with your browser and the authentication will be seamless. You don't have to do much about it, right? Eventually, too, Visual Studio will ask you for your name and email. The idea of this name and email is every single commit you do in Git from there on will have these 2 pieces of information, which is important. If you don't set the correct ones, in the longer term, you will have the wrong information about commits. But anyway, let's start cloning a repository, and I'll go to my Visual Studio window where I should have it somewhere here. So the easiest way is you just have to come and you clone a repository, right? Yeah, thanks. The show participants is, I can see it, but I'll show you here what I see. Just, you see the 2 here. This is the people that I see. And then because I'm following the chat here, Then if I switch to the participants, then I cannot see the rest, but thanks for the suggestion. That's what I thought at the beginning too. So anyway, we clone the repository. So what is the repository location? Very easy. We just come here, we copy this URL, and we paste it here. Nothing else. Once you paste it there, you click on clone. So what is clone doing? Clone is creating a local copy of that repository. And here is the first thing that you need to learn. The copy that you have in your machine will be your local. The copy we have in GitHub is called your remote. So local and remote are important terms that you need to understand. We will get to the point of origin is another word that is common in these terms, but we will get to that. So anyway, we clone it. And once we clone it, then Visual Studio, let's see, I hope that is not too slow. It's cloning it, you will see some Git output on the bottom of your Visual Studio window. By the way, this is slower than usual because I'm sharing my screen. So there you go. It's just starting. Okay. So now you see in the Solution Explorer, you see what the repository has. If we go back to the repository, you have the README here, and you have the README here. So you don't need to open it. Have you gotten to this place? At least, have you tried it? Does it work? You feel free to just open the mic and say that it doesn't work or whatever comment you want to make. This is the steps, by the way, I'm just sharing here. These are the steps that I actually posted in the presentation. But next step, let's say that we already have the Git repository, like I mentioned. Now what happens? How do I add my Visual Studio solution? And the point there, okay, thank you, James. And feel free to ask later too. I will be able to help or anyone in the conversation. So now I want to add a Visual Studio solution. So what I do, I will create a new project. I come here to my project. I just said add, and I said new project. You will have to repeat that in the future, so then you can figure out what type of project you are going to work on. Give me a moment. So I can choose any sort of application, right? In this case, a C# console application, let's say. I'm gonna go next. I have pre-selected C# and Windows here. I'm more like into Python, but then I'm just creating here. And I'm gonna name it Hello World here. Just the location stays untouched, right? I go to the next. I'm gonna use the .NET Core 3.1. I'm not gonna compile it on anything. So then I'm just not going to really do a working application. What I want to demonstrate is how Git works. I create it, and then Visual Studio starts doing its magic. It creates a bunch of files that we need to keep in the repository. Let's give it a second. I hope that you are doing the same. The ones I can see anyway. But so while this is loading, there you go. It loaded. So I have a hello world, and it doesn't matter if it works or not. I'm not going to compile it, right? But now you see here in the Solution Explorer, you see a few more files. You see hello world. You have a bin directory and obj directory. You have the program CS, which is what we have on the screen, and whatnot, right? Everything is fine. But these files that are in your solution window, now you come here to this other tab that says Git changes. In Git changes, you will see all the files that have a change or that are new, or that you need to check into your repository, right? So you see a bunch of files here. But now, one of the details about source code is that you have source code, but then you have the output of the source code, which is after you compile or you link your code, then you will have these extra files. For example, all of these subjects directory. All of this is files that I don't need because they come from your source code. So this is the next step that we will need to do. After I add the project, so I create it, or what you see. Okay, you have all the files. Now we need a git ignore file. So what happens with git ignore? This is a very important file. I asked you not to create it at the beginning because we're going to add it here. The point is that this file tells Git, okay, from all my list of files, only these are source code, the rest I don't need. And this is very common. Like, for example, if you turn out that you have a file just for your nodes, you can exclude it. You don't want to check it in. How does it work? Well, we need to add a git ignore file. To do that, we're going to go to Git settings. Workloads, it depends on what you're going to develop, but I think you should choose the ASP.NET, ASP.NET.Core, and C#, and there is several .NET workloads that you can install, but you can add them later too, I understand. So anyway, coming back to this section. So then if I go to Git repository settings, you see that there is a Git file, an ignore file, it doesn't have any. Pay attention to this window. In Git changes, you have a lot of changes, 17 at the moment. But now I'm going to add a Git ignore file, and you will see what happens. So now it turns out that I have only 2 changes in my window. So what happened, and this is what I want to explain. If you come to the Solution Explorer, and now you see a Git ignore file. If I open it, this is just a plain list of file pattern names, where it's saying all the files that I'm never going to check in. Why I'm not going to check them in? Because they are generated automatically by Visual Studio. So then this git ignore file, you can customize it. For example, if it turns out that I want to add another pattern, I can just add it by myself. But now you have, in your Git changes, you have only the git ignore itself plus 2 files. Questions so far? Why do we need it? No? Okay. So now here we come to the next step. Now you have all the files. And you know that Git itself is telling you that you have changes. But now I want to commit all these changes to the repository. The step is called stage in Visual Studio. By the way, this stage is a concept in Git in which you first need to stage the files and then you commit them. But this in the command line, you don't do both steps. You just add and then commit. So then you might find different terms, but let's do it together. So what happens? I come here, and in this plus that you see here, you can say stage all. If I stage all files, what is going to happen? Now it tells me that there is 3 stage changes, the git ignore plus the other 2. Now that I have all these stage changes, I commit them. So I click in commit stage. Sorry, I need to add a message. First commit of my code and solution. Yeah. So you have to add a comment and you do the commit stage. There you go. So now you have a commit created locally. Now, what does it mean? It means that in your local, you have all these changes in your Git repo, but they are not yet in the remote. They are not still in GitHub. If I go back to GitHub, there is nothing here. So what happens there is that you need to commit first locally, and later you can send them to the server. But let's just go back. Again, I staged all files, I commit the staged, and then I created the locally. So far, so good, right? This window is very important. I wanted to demonstrate. Now you start seeing these lines here. Automatically, Visual Studio will start telling you when there are changes and who actually added them. For example, in this case, if I click, look, the description is the same description that I added, my credentials, the date, commit. Now, this has only one change, but when you have thousands of commits, this window becomes very important, right? And what I really like about the Visual Studio window is that it tells it for every single section, every single function or method, you can actually do it. You can trace back. Okay, so far, they are committed. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so now let's move to the next. So now let's talk about the origin repository. Remember that I told you that the local is in your machine, remote is somewhere else. So Git has a concept of the origin repository. The origin is essentially the remote where you're getting your code from and where you're going to push back. So how do I find where is the origin in my Visual Studio? You can go here and then you can, in either of these options, there is an option of manage remotes, or you can do it in the Git options too. If I click on manage remotes, you see remotes here. And this is the origin and the origin of my repository. Now, what is important is that the origin, and this is the cool thing about Git, other source control systems before didn't have that. Let's say that I'm working with Andres. We're actually working together in this code. So he has his own local. I have my own local, and there is a common origin. But I perfectly can push my changes directly to Andres' repository in his machine. There are ways to accomplish that. And then I could change just the address. Instead of HTTPS, I can use some other sort of protocol. But the point is that because it's a distributed source code, I don't have limitations on where the origin should be. The other thing is that you can edit it. If I just change, instead of putting it in GitHub, I send it to another repository, it works perfectly. It doesn't matter. The Git configuration is universal, which means your repo lives here, you push it somewhere else, that repo will always be the same. And even better, remember that this commit had an ID. This ID actually has a very long sequence of characters, and this ID is unique forever in the repository. Of course, not in every repository, but in your repository. If you ever get a copy of your repository 10 years in the future and it was originally from you, you will find the same commit with the same ID. So now the concept of the origin is important because the origin will be always where you're pushing your changes back. Now, in practice, Git has the possibility to do both. The fetch is where you're pulling the code from. Push is where you're sending it to. Git has the possibility that you fetch it from one place and you push it to another. But I haven't seen really a use case in which someone is separating both. So for all practices, they are both the same. So now, this is what I wanted to explain here. That's the origin, right? Now, now what I want to do, I want to push to the origin. As you can see, as I mentioned before, my repository is still the same. There is no changes there. But if I come here and now I go to this window, you will see the option of push. If I click on push, something interesting is going to happen. Git is going to take my local copy of the repository and it's going to synchronize it with the remote, with my origin, right? So there you go. The commit was created locally, successfully pushed to origin main. So now if I go back to GitHub, let's see if I'm not making this up. There you go. You see my commits. And more importantly, if I go and see this is the ID that I have seen before, 6cc, 6cc, yeah, this is exactly the same. So Git in practice takes only the first characters, but when you click on it, you can see that the actual ID is this sequence of letters there. What I like about Git is that Git doesn't always require the whole sequence. If you have very few commits, it's just going to require maybe 6 characters at the beginning. But eventually, the more commits you have, you might need more characters just to make it unique. But it takes from the shorter version of it. And that's the push to origin. So far, you have pulled from Git, you have created the repository, you have pulled from the repository, you have added your own code, you have added a git ignore, you have sent it back to GitHub, and the whole flow is, let's say, complete. You push, pull, and this is the rest of your project. I'll stop for a second here because I would like to hear if you have any specific questions about that so far. At least one question. I'll wait for one question, at least. Question or comment.
So if you're always working on your local machine, you just use the push, you never fetch, right?
No, you always, well, if you are the only one working in the project, yes. But then in practice, that repository in any company, even as small as a startup, has at least 2 people working on the same repository, right?
Yeah, got it.
Which means that you're going to be pulling the update from the other. By the way, if you try to push your change and your copy is not updated, then Git will give some error. Let's try to make, I hadn't thought about that, but let's make a test. Let me see if I can make it. I'll come here to the README, and then let's see if I can edit it, because I can do it directly in GitHub. This is a live commit on GitHub, right? And then how do I push it from here? Commit changes, update, just test. And commit changes, okay. So now, this is my GitHub repo, right? But now, if I come to my repository, my own repository doesn't have that change, right? So then let's say that I will add some demo one, some small change, right? If I try to push to stage this change, let's say I stage it, and then I commit it, I probably should get testing if there is a conflict. Commit stage. Let's see what it says. Should be pushing, but actually it did work, right? Let me try to refresh here. No, it didn't work. And I don't know why it didn't work.
Did you push it?
Yes, sorry, that's correct. Sorry, the silly me, right? I didn't push it. Let's see, it's pushing, it's yet in push. There you go. Because my local branch is behind the remote branch. So now you understand what it means, right? It means that my local branch.
Got it.
So then you will have concept like that, by the way, the concept of ahead or behind are very clear. Someone else did one commit. So usually you get cryptic errors from Git, like saying this branch is 3 commits ahead and 2 behind. What does it mean? Well, you understand. But now I have the option. I pull and push. Let's only do pull, and you will see what happens. See, this is the same as if I had fetch. By the way, you don't fetch. After the first one, you say you pull because you're just updating the repository. But now we get into merge conflicts, right? And these merge conflicts will have like an issue. Okay, which one is the winner? I need to edit it by hand. I can open the merge editor. By the way, this is not something that I practice in the presentation, but I think I should be able to do it. Who can tell me? Taking coming, yes. Taking coming.
There is a question from Salina Lita in the in the comment section.
If GitHub is on private email, but VS with different words, it doesn't matter, because what you only need is that the credentials for GitHub, Visual Studio will ask you for them, right? And once Visual Studio asks for them, then it will link it will get like a private token from GitHub locally. But it doesn't matter if you Visual Studio can be using whatever address. In fact, you don't even need to log in with Visual Studio, right? That's the answer. So anyway, I think I did this. Merge. Did it merge? I think I got myself into some trouble. By the way, this is not uncommon. I get into the merge issue here. Let me save. I shouldn't have done that, but anyway, I need to get out of the merge conflict. By the way, what you're seeing there is if someone did a change in the repository, I did a change in the same very close line, then what will be the issue, right? So the easiest for me probably will be, yes. Okay, I just merged. I took my changes, committing changes, commit stage, push. If you notice, I removed the one afterwards, right? I push it back. And that should be it, I think. Successfully pushed, yes. So now if I refresh, well, no issues anymore, right? I removed the one because it was the conflict. But the point I wanted to mention is the question was if you always have to pull or push. Practice, you always pull and then push, even if you're alone. That would be my suggestion. Let's move to the next one because the next topic is the last one. It should be really simple, but sometimes it gets complicated to understand the conceptually what it means. So Git has the concept of branches. What is a branch? Well, if you have a code, you can think of a straight line, right? But let's say that someone in your team wants to test a feature but doesn't want to make it into the final product. So what they will start is a separate branch. The code splits and follows two different lines. And I have a live demonstration of one of the biggest, most popular repositories, how you can check that. But let's understand first conceptually what it is. And instead of drawing myself what it is, I actually went to take two of the sources that explain them. This is the first one. This is from the GitHub documentation. You can think of a branch as, by the way, in this case, we're moving to the right. That's the direction of our code, right? So then master is still here. By the way, the name master is not used anymore than much. Now the name is main because of some connotations that it had in the US. So main is more used now, but master is used to be that one. When you come here to this point and then you want to start testing a feature, then you split. And then this is called the feature one branch. And then the feature one branch can split, then you can move to the feature two. What happens is that the code is moving in three different lines, but let's say the feature two is done. What you do is called a pull request, or you can think only as you're merging the code to that branch, and then this one will merge to the first one. In the second case, the feature two merges directly with master, right? So it's just thinking about lines. And by the way, Bye-bye, I'm sorry if I'm going too fast, but then the presentation has a step-by-step, so you can repeat it, right? The Git documentation, by the way, I have a link to this one, is a little bit more cryptic, but the way they describe it, wanted to show. The code is going in, this was the first commit, second commit, third commit, and so on. What they call branch is that JAWS is pointing to one particular commit. Testing is pointing to the next commit. So what you're saying is that the master branch is in this commit and this testing branch is in the next commit. Either way, whatever way you understand it, is just parallel lines of code. How do I do a branch? And this is actually very easy to do in Visual Studio. Janice is saying that you managed to create repository with new project inside instead of new project in current repo. That's totally fine too. I said that there is no one way of doing it, right? You just have to know what you did. That's the whole point, right? There is a whole set of windows in Visual Studio. One of them is called Git repository. If you go with the Git repository, this is the only branch that you have today. It's the main branch. So how do I create a branch? By the way, you can see in the local history, there is some lines here. Here is telling me that there is already another branch. Who can tell me why there are two branches here? Where does that other branch come from? Someone?
Because you made a different version than was on the remote server.
Exactly, you got it. That's the point, is that when you have a local copy, technically for Git, you just have a branch of the code, right? And then if someone does a change in the server, that's a different branch. But if you want to create a branch for yourself, how do you do it? You right click here and you say, let's create a new local branch. So I will say my branch, right? You have the main, and this checkout concept is very important, but I'll explain to you what it means. My branch, there you go. So, okay, you have main, you have my branch. Of course, you have to be more creative than me, right? My branch is too ugly name. I wanted to call it my pretty branch, but too long. Anyway, the point is that now you have different branches. You have one that is highlighted in bold. This is your current branch, or what they call sometimes head. Head points to the current branch. What does it mean? If I come to README and I make a change, this is yet another change in a branch. I'm just making the commit. I'll say let's stage it. Yeah, I'll say testing branches. There you go. Commit the stage. Just a small test. If I come here, now you will see my branch has this change, right? If you go to main, it doesn't have that change. This one does have that change, right? But even more important, you have this red box here that is telling you that the main branch is at this point. So you have more changes here. What happens if I want to see what is in the main branch? Just pay attention. This line is only in my branch. There is the concept of checking out. Check out means that you want to work with that branch, that you want to make it your current branch. I just click checkout. You will see that, 1 second, that now the main is bold. If I go back to my README, it doesn't have the line. If I go back to my branch and then I say check out that particular branch, let's give it a second until it's bold. Now it's bold. I come to the README and this has the change. Essentially, you're seeing there that I have two parallel branches. In one, I'm testing changes to my README. In the other, I'm not. So now you have two possibilities with this branch. You can just come and maybe you can choose to delete the branch because you don't want your changes. By the way, I cannot delete a branch unless I have chosen another one, but it's not what I'm going to do at the moment. You will have to check out main and then you delete this. This is what people call abandon changes. You did the branch, it didn't work, just abandon everything, go back to the state that main used to be. But I can come here and I can say that I want to merge, sorry, I want to check it out again. And you will see something here. Okay, so it's checked out. So then I can say here, merge my branch into main. What does it mean? It means that it's going to bring the changes I did in my branch into main. So far, as we talked, main doesn't have any changes, right? Now let's merge it. Merge my... Are you sure? Yes. Let's give it a second. Okay, now we're gonna go back to main. And now I have those changes, right? Let me see. Sorry. Yes, there you go. This is the change I did in the branch. So the concept of branches is a bit messing with your head, but what is important is you just see it as is pointing towards one line of development or to the other one. Real projects have thousands of branches sometimes. And let me show you one actual project that I had even prepared the. Okay. So what I did is I cloned the repository for VS Code. I think it had like 500 megabytes. It's very quick to clone. But this is the command line that you use to see all the branches in the project. If I type that, I'll explain to you what it shows. So head or main, this is the main branch, the origin, whatever, doesn't matter. You see here it splits, right? So that means someone did a branch. What happened? Well, you can see that someone created the branch Microsoft Sandy 081 settings editor trust and merged all those changes into this one. You can see below here that there is one branch. There was notebook dev, and then there is more branches on the bottom. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 branches in parallel here. Sometimes the branches are branches of branches. You can get really interesting lines, but essentially what you're saying is that you have a history of different development lines. In practice, this is not important for you now, but Git, the only thing that it does, it just keeps a list of all the commits, and the branch is just a collection of each of the changes. But that's now, as I think this is a complicated topic anyway, I have the screenshots for branches here. Right? Now the question, what would you like me to repeat? Or does it is so clear that I don't need to repeat it? Was it clear about what I mentioned about branches?
More or less. Need to start working to understand it better.
Okay, okay. Anyone else would like to say something?
Maybe could you create a well-one branch and merge and do something merge with it?
Sorry,
a little bit play with branches to create a conflict
between branches.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's easy. Let me create one. I'll create a new local branch from. Creating conflicts is my conflicting branch, I'll call it. Yeah. So then it would be very easy. Right now we're in main, so I will say it doesn't. It's not. Sorry. It's not called let's build 2021, but let's build 2022, right? So I need to commit this change. I just committed 2022 change, right? So that's my change. But now I can, sorry, I did in my conflicting branch actually. That's what I did, the change. Let's see. Yes, 22. Okay, now let's check out main. And I will do that main is going to be 2020 because for some reason I think in the past. So now I'm in the main branch, right? I'm gonna commit this change. 2020 change. Yeah. So we're 2020 change and this 2021. But if I do, sorry, I go here and then I want to merge my conflicting branch into main, what will happen? Do you think it will be a conflict or it will gonna fix it automatically?
I think it will be fixed automatic.
You see? By the way, Git is very good on the, oh, there you go. Merge conflicted with conflicts, resolve the conflicts. Well, I have to open the README. There you go. It cannot merge it. So typically what you have to do to solve a merge is you just have to decide which was the change. Well, I want to leave the 2022. So you just remove. So you just leave the part of the content that you want to merge, right? You can do the merge editor because it offers like diff in between files and so on, right? But once I do that, essentially I should be able to commit it here with conflicts fixed. Let me see if I can do it here or not. I don't think I can do it here. If someone can remind me, how do I complete this merge? Actually, I didn't manage to complete it. Supposedly, it doesn't have any conflicts anymore. And that's, I apologize, but this particular problem is because I don't know how to solve them in Visual Studio. But 2020, okay, take current. Do you take it? Accept merge? It actually created both.
Yeah, that's because you clicked on take
exactly
on one side and took take current, so it took both.
Exactly.
And accepted the merge was the one that accepted it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But you saw what's the point, right? So then this problem, by the way, it doesn't happen as often as you think, because when you have a large code base, it's very unlikely that two developers are going to modify the exact same line, but it still happens, right? And then I'm so afraid of conflict because sometimes in this case, it's just one line, but if you modify the code and then the code doesn't compile anymore, then you have to deal with that problem too, right? But anyway, that's the issue. But yeah, that's the conflicting branch. Any other question? How does it work? What would you like to do? If you don't have any other question, I think that's very much the time that we have, because I took already longer than 45 minutes that I wanted. In the presentation that is in the repository, I left these 5 repositories. The first one is the Bible for Git. This is the one that contains exactly what it does, but you will find it a little cryptic. One of the problems with Git is that if you go a little bit below the surface, you will have to speak another language, essentially. So besides the pull, push, clone, and the basic operations, once you start reflecting on conflicts, or for example, the command that I just showed you, this one, git log graph decorate one line. It has a lot of parameters. So the best is you can go to Stack Overflow, for example, and someone has had the problem. But this is the Bible. Now, GitHub has a very good guide. I highly recommend it. But most importantly, this cheat sheet is probably what I use the most. Let me open it. Let's see. This is the cheat sheet. Because it offers you just one liner and one single paragraph about what you have to do. For example, what merge does, push, pull, and so on. And then you can ask for help from Git itself, right, about what it does. But it's very short on purpose. The idea is that you print it in one piece of paper and you have it always available. Last is that we have the Git experience on Visual Studio, because this is what you will be using. I highly recommend it. But essentially, the screenshots that I took is similar to what they explained there, so they explain it a little bit longer. And I added like a funny page, this Dangit Git. By the way, this is the correct one, because the original page has a different swear word. It's funny. The point is that this page is, you did something terrible wrong, how do you fix it, right? And then it's very short, but you will see that sometimes you will go to this page and it will tell you all the mistakes that you have had. But that's basically what I would like to finish. Any other questions you will have? I hope that you found it useful and not too quick, that I didn't move too quick. But either way, it's recorded, it's in the slides, so you feel free also to ping me in Discord if you would like any answer about it. So yeah, I'll leave the mic open. Who would like to let me know of a question, or what do you think, or did you find it useful or not? Or maybe I put you to sleep.
No, that was definitely useful. I think I will even use it some time later in my work. So I'm very thankful.
Great. Ushan said that it's very useful. Thank you. Okay, so then with that, I stop sharing, and then Yanis, what's next?
Yeah, so we still have some time reserved if people have questions.
Mm-hmm.
And today I would kind of encourage you, if you have some questions regarding the process itself. Oh, wait, I'm not having my camera open. Nobody mentioning that. Okay, so today I encourage you to ask questions regarding the process itself and the next task. And if you have the more technical ones, give some time for a read and reach out in Discord so we can do the follow-up as well there. But yeah, basically, if you don't have questions or you want to get straight into trying out something in Git, or reading through the materials, or just kind of getting on with the evening, the weather looks beautiful outside, that's also a good option. So the Q&A is less formal and less structured, and basically, as long as we have questions, I will be here. But then if everyone wants to be somewhere else, I'm gone as well. And we will move to Discord.
Just to make sure I understand correctly, so next time we meet in a week, we need to have page.
Yeah,
Done.
basically that's that. So just to illustrate what you should do. And I'm repeating myself because it's a bit different from what standard trainings do. Standard trainings kind of walk you through it and then you go do it, but nobody kind of looks at what you did. But here we kind of trying to do the reverse to kind of let you do it in your own time. And we can make these kind of contact sessions a bit shorter. So you should go to the repository. You should check out the second event, go through the pre-read materials. Maybe some of those things you are already familiar with, maybe some of those will be new things for you. You can kind of follow the tutorials there or kind of just read through them, up to you. But in the end, you should have a working web page that uses MVC. It should kind of load a list of people, a list or a table, up to you how you style it and design it. It will have some default styling and default layout from when you create the MVC project, but do think about, do you want to keep it or do you want to do something more interesting with it, or you maybe want to set yourself a challenge that, hey, I want to recreate this design I've seen somewhere. That's also a good exercise. So you need to be able to build and run it locally on your own development machine, and you need to store that code in the source repository. So that's the basic requirements that you need to fulfill. And the business use case you're building around is building a web application that supports event organizers to manage the list of people which are attending the event. So that's the basic use case. If you want to kind of do some more kind of explanation or in-depth, or want to get in-depth comments about the business use case. So for example, if you want me to generate business requirements, that can be done, but I would prefer to do that kind of in writing on Discord. So it's a bit more difficult task than doing it on the fly. So I would prefer to do it in a bit more async mode. But the basic requirement is pretty simple. If you feel that you have more time and want to practice more, I would suggest to expand it from just a list and try to imagine, so what would an event organization app or web application need? And probably it's kind of different pages, both describing the event, allowing people to subscribe to the event, and maybe some other functionality, well, which is up for you to choose and to define what it actually is. But if you kind of have interesting ideas or kind of set yourself interesting challenges, do share those things in Discord. Yeah, let me just check with the questions. Yeah, and as Diane mentioned, so next session is on 29th of April, and we'll try to do better with our communication. This time we got the wrong link, and me screwing up with time zones also was not really funny. So yeah, I'll try to do better.
But they're still going to be in Meetup published.
Yes, we will add to the meetup, and instead of kind of typing everything in the email, well, I will not be sending any more emails regarding the events. So we will publish them in Meetup, and I will do the announcements in Discord, but the time itself, I will just link to the Meetup event so that we have one place where we have the link for the event and one place where the time is listed, so I have less chances to miss up. But yeah, that's lessons learned from my side for how it will be published. And for Andrei's question, so ASP.NET Core web app MVC project, yes, most likely. You can create the MVC project also from starting from very scratch. So doing just a kind of empty project based on ASP.NET and then adding all the components yourself. There are tutorials for that as well if you want extra challenge. But Andres, you're right.
But I would like also know, do we implement registration? Or how
not
in the future we
not mandatory, not mandatory, but you could, if you kind of feel that there's not enough to do, at least you can create the registration pages just to practice with the front-end development part. So for the next session, I would definitely say that don't try to okay, so don't try to go deeper into other sections before time. That way you can kind of avoid overstretching yourself or going into tangents and starting to develop something which we'll not cover for a while. So focus mostly on things that you can do on front end only. You don't need to load any data from databases, and for authorization, it kind of involves the question then what are you using for storing the credentials? And for that, it could be using Active Directory, it could be using some other form of kind of registration or kind of logging in via Facebook. That's a more complex option in my opinion, or having your own kind of credentials database, but that's a bad practice and I don't want to teach that. So yeah, but that's a tangent you can explore and add on top, but I would prefer if you can more create a UI for that first and have the navigation and layout working before we jump into more kind of technical functionalities, because the first one is mostly about front end and mostly about how users will experience the application when they open it. Okay, anything else?
It was mentioned that it wouldn't be possible to use ASP.NET Core with Visual Studio Code, but I found this. I posted a link in the chat. I just like a fan of Visual Studio Code, so I try to do everything with it, like Python, like.
Okay, so Visual Studio Code, we will not use it as the main tooling, mostly because in the projects we, well, the larger solutions become a bit unwieldy when you use Visual Studio Code. Then again, Visual Studio Code is something which we anyways use specifically for JavaScript, for example, in our project. So for you, you can still use it, but you will need to kind of manually launch the generation for the code. So you can kind of drop that question later in Discord and I'll link to you specifically the guidelines, but basically through command line or through terminal, you can then launch the scaffolding. So it creates the project for you. And that way you can kind of still get a similar experience, but yeah, it's a bit different then.
Yeah, thanks.
But in terms of kind of development, yeah, it's fully capable and you can launch the solution from there and compile it. So no problem. You just need to be more familiar with the commands through the terminal or through the console.
Yeah, in Visual Studio is like a Visual Studio Code is like a constructor, like puzzle. I think like you add everything there manually, like debugging, like NPM packages, and yeah.
Yeah, it's very capable. Yeah, very customizable editor/IDE integrated development environment. It's more bare bones, but it also loads much faster than Visual Studio, especially if you want to work on something kind of very large project and don't want to open the 3 instances of Visual Studio just to edit different files, or have different files on the screen at the same time, then it's very useful. And with plugins, you're basically able to use it with whatever language you need. So I haven't used it for Java, but I have used it for together with Python. So works great.
Yeah, works great with Python.